In the vast expanse of the Andromeda Spiral, where alien empires rise and fall like cosmic tides, humanity stands as the youngest species to ever challenge the ancient order. They are neither the strongest nor the most technologically advanced, but they possess something that makes even the most powerful beings in the galaxy pause in wonder and fear. It is not their weapons, though their determination in battle is legendary. It is not their ships, though they sail between stars with reckless courage. It is something far more dangerous to those who would see them kneel. It is their willingness to die for others. When Captain Marcus Chun threw himself into the path of certain death to save a child who wasn't even his own species, he had no idea that his sacrifice would echo across the galaxy, reaching the ears of the most powerful being in known space. The Zephyrian Queen, ruler of 1,000 worlds, has never encountered a species quite like humanity before. Now, as Marcus awakens in a place that shouldn't exist, surrounded by beings whose very presence should terrify him, he discovers that his moment of heroism has trapped him in a web of galactic politics, ancient prophecies, and a mystery that could reshape the balance of power among the stars. Some acts of courage are rewarded with medals. Others change the fate of entire civilizations. This is the story of what happens when humanity's greatest strength becomes both their salvation and their curse, and why the most powerful queen in the galaxy would rather command a single human soldier than rule a dozen worlds. The energy blast meant for Princess Lyralii would have vaporized her delicate crystalline form in an instant. Captain Marcus Chin knew this the moment he saw the assassin's weapon charge to lethal levels. He also knew, with the cold certainty of a soldier who had calculated odds of survival for 15 years, that he could reach her in time. What he didn't know was that his decision to throw himself between a Zephyrian princess and certain death would land him in the most secure medical facility in the Andromeda Spiral, staring up at beings whose existence most humans considered myth. Marcus groaned as consciousness returned, his body feeling like he'd been trampled by a herd of Terran elephants. The first thing he noticed was the absence of pain where there should have been agony. The energy weapon had caught him square in the chest, and he remembered the searing heat, the smell of his own flesh burning, the darkness creeping in from the edges of his vision. The second thing he noticed was that he was definitely not in Kansas anymore. The ceiling above him seemed to be made of liquid starlight, flowing and shifting in patterns that hurt to look at directly. When he turned his head, careful movements testing his apparently intact neck, he saw walls that appeared to be carved from single massive crystals, each one pulsing with soft, internal light. The air tasted of ozone and something sweet, like honey mixed with the metallic tang of a lightning storm. "You're awake." The voice was melodious, with harmonic overtones that seemed to resonate in his bones. "Good." Mother was beginning to worry you might not recover fully. Marcus turned toward the voice and felt his breath catch. Princess Lyralii stood beside his bed, but she looked nothing like she had during the diplomatic function where he'd saved her life. Then, she had been wearing what his briefing materials had described as a cultural adaptation suit, technology that made her appear roughly humanoid to avoid diplomatic incidents. Now, he saw her as she truly was. She stood nearly 8 feet tall, her form elegantly elongated and graceful beyond human comprehension. Her skin was the deep blue-black of space between stars, shot through with veins of silver that pulsed gently with her heartbeat. Instead of hair, crystalline formations grew from her scalp, each strand catching and refracting light into miniature rainbows. Her eyes were the most unsettling feature, vast pools of swirling galaxy that seemed to hold depths impossible for any physical structure. "Princess," Marcus managed, his voice coming out as a croak. He tried to sit up and was surprised when his body obeyed without the protest he expected. "Are you all right?" "The assassin. Dead," she said simply, her expression unreadable. "My mother's guard arrived moments after your intervention. They were efficient in their questioning before his execution." She tilted her head, studying him with those impossible eyes. The more interesting question is why you're all right. By all calculations, you should be very much not all right. Marcus looked down at himself for the first time, and his confusion deepened. His chest was bare, revealing skin that was unmarked except for a faint, star-shaped scar directly over his heart. He remembered the weapon's beam punching through his dress uniform, remembered the impossible heat and the certainty of death. How long was I unconscious? 3 standard cycles, Lyralii said, moving to a crystalline chair that seemed to grow from the floor as she approached it. Long enough for my mother to have some very interesting conversations with your diplomatic corps. And with you, while you were in the healing chamber. Conversations with me? Marcus frowned. I don't remember any conversations. Your conscious mind was dormant, but consciousness is a more complex thing than most species realize. She leaned forward, and Marcus caught a scent like winter wind and distant stars. Tell me, Captain Shun, what do you know about the Zephyrian concept of life debt? Marcus searched his memory, pulling up fragments from his briefing materials. It's mentioned in the cultural files. Something about honor obligations when one being saves another's life. The debt must be acknowledged by both parties and witnessed by. He trailed off as the implications hit him. By the crown, Lyralii finished. Which means my mother, who is currently expecting you in the throne room as soon as the medical team clears you for mobility. She stood, and the chair melted back into the floor. I should warn you, Captain. Mother has taken a particular interest in your species since your sacrifice. Zephyrians respect courage, but what you did, it was beyond courage. It was beyond rational thought entirely. Marcus swung his legs over the side of the bed, testing his strength. Whatever they'd done to heal him had worked remarkably well. He felt better than he had in years. Princess, with respect, I didn't stop to think about honor debts or cultural implications. I saw someone about to die, someone I was sworn to protect as part of the diplomatic mission, and I acted. Yes, Lyralii said, and for the first time, something like a smile crossed her features. That's exactly what makes it so remarkable, and so problematic. Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the chamber's entrance dilated open, revealing 2 figures that made the princess look almost mundane by comparison. The Zephyrian royal guard stood nearly 10 feet tall, their forms more angular and aggressive than Lyralii's elegant curves. They wore armor that seemed to be made of captured starlight, and their weapons hummed with barely contained energy that made Marcus's teeth ache. Princess, the larger of the 2, spoke, his voice like distant thunder. The queen commands the human's presence. Of course she does, Lyralii murmured. Captain Shun, I believe you're about to discover that saving the life of a Zephyrian princess is far more complicated than taking a bullet for a fellow human. As they walked through corridors that defied geometric logic, Marcus tried to process what he'd gotten himself into. The briefing materials had mentioned that the Zephyrian Empire controlled nearly a third of the Andromeda Spiral, encompassing thousands of inhabited worlds and dozens of client species. They were older than human civilization by tens of thousands of years, and their technology was so advanced that some of their capabilities were indistinguishable from magic. What the materials hadn't conveyed was the sheer otherworldly majesty of their architecture. The palace seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, with impossible angles and surfaces that showed scenes from distant worlds. Gravity was more of a suggestion than a law, and Marcus found himself walking on walls and ceilings as naturally as floors. Your species fascinates our scholars, one of the guards said suddenly, his tone conversational despite the circumstances. In all our history, we have encountered precisely 0 species that would sacrifice themselves for beings they barely know, of races they've only just met. What about species that would sacrifice themselves for their own kind? Marcus asked. Oh, that's common enough. Family bonds, pack loyalty, even national patriotism, we've seen all of that. But in the moment before you moved, our sensors detected something remarkable in your neural patterns. Marcus waited for elaboration, but The guard seemed content to let the statement hang in the air like an unanswered question. They entered a vast chamber that took Marcus several moments to fully comprehend. The throne room of the Zephyrian Queen was less a room than a pocket dimension, with a ceiling that opened directly onto the cosmos above. Stars wheeled overhead in patterns that weren't quite right, and the floor beneath their feet was a map of the galaxy rendered in what appeared to be actual stellar material. At the center of it all sat the Queen herself. Empress Nalera Vexthal was ancient in a way that had nothing to do with years and everything to do with presence. She was larger than her daughter, easily 12 feet tall, and her crystalline crown seemed to be made of captured pieces of various stars. Her robes moved independently of any wind, flowing around her as if alive, and when she turned her attention to Marcus, he felt the weight of her gaze like a physical force. "Approach," she commanded, and her voice carried harmonics that spoke directly to the primitive part of Marcus's brain that recognized apex predators. Marcus walked forward until he stood at the base of steps that led up to her throne. Up close, he could see that her skin bore the marks of great age and great power, with scars that looked like they'd been made by weapons that could crack planets. "Captain Marcus Chun of the Human Colonial Defense Force," she said, and somehow she made his simple name sound like an incantation. "Do you know why you're here? I assume it has something to do with the life debt your daughter mentioned, Your Majesty." "Assume." The Queen's laugh was like crystal chimes in a winter wind. "Yes, I suppose you would have to assume. Your species has so little experience with true power that you can only guess at its implications." She leaned forward, and Marcus caught a scent like burning stars. "Tell me, human, what did you think would happen when you threw yourself in front of that weapon?" "I thought I would die, and the princess would live." "Nothing else? No thought of reward, of recognition, of how your sacrifice might be remembered?" Marcus considered lying, but something about the Queen's presence made deception seem not just futile, but physically impossible. "I thought about whether my death would mean anything, whether saving one life would somehow balance out the lives I couldn't save in the war." "Ah!" The Queen sat back, and for the first time, her expression showed something approaching satisfaction. "There it is. The human condition that has our xenopsychologists in such an uproar. You carry the weight of failures that weren't your fault, deaths that weren't your responsibility, guilt for surviving when others didn't." She gestured, and images appeared in the air between them, scenes from Marcus's military service that he'd never spoken about to anyone. The massacre on Kepler 7, where he'd led his unit into an ambush that killed half his men. The civilian transport that had been destroyed while he was evacuating another ship. The 100 small failures and compromises that had shaped his decision to request diplomatic duty instead of returning to active combat. "Your species," the Queen continued, "feels responsible for everything. It's simultaneously your greatest weakness and your most remarkable strength. And it's why you've presented me with an unprecedented problem." "Problem, Your Majesty?" "The life debt, Captain. By our laws, by traditions older than your species, my daughter owes you a debt that can only be repaid by preserving your life at the cost of her own. But more than that, by saving her, you've invoked something we haven't had to consider in 3,000 years." The Queen stood, and as she did, the chamber around them seemed to expand, the stars wheeling overhead, shifting to show different constellations. "You've invoked the right of sanctuary. By proving that your species is capable of true, selfless courage, you've earned the right to claim protection for your people from any threat too great for them to face alone." Marcus felt his mouth go dry. "Your Majesty, I didn't know about any right of sanctuary. I was just trying to save your daughter." "Of course you were. That's exactly why the right applies." The Queen began to descend the steps, each footfall echoing through dimensions Marcus couldn't see. "The right exists to identify species worth preserving, worth lifting up from their current limitations. It was written by beings who understood that true courage is the rarest element in the universe." When she reached the bottom of the steps, The queen towered over Marcus by more than 5 feet, but somehow her presence felt less overwhelming and more protective. The last species to invoke the right of sanctuary were the Velkarim 8,000 years ago. They became our most valued allies, and when their sun began to die, we moved their entire civilization to a new world rather than let them perish. And what happened to them? They thrived. They learned. They became something greater than they were. The queen's crystalline features showed something that might have been a smile, but they were already a space-faring civilization when we found them. Humans are barely out of their cradle world, taking their first tentative steps into a galaxy full of things that could destroy them without noticing. Marcus began to understand the shape of what was happening, and he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. You're saying my actions have committed my entire species to something. I'm saying your actions have earned your species an opportunity that most never receive. But opportunities, Captain, come with obligations. The queen reached out with one crystalline finger and touched the scar over Marcus's heart. The healing process did more than repair your body. It created a connection, a way for us to monitor your species' development and guide them when necessary. And if we refuse this guidance, then you refuse, and life continues as it was. But the galaxy is a dangerous place, Captain Shun. There are threats out here that make your species' petty wars look like children's games. Threats that have consumed entire civilizations. Her finger traced the edge of the scar, and Marcus felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. The devourers who consume worlds for sustenance. The synthesis, which converts organic life into computational material. The void singers, whose songs can drive entire planets to madness. The queen stepped back, her expression becoming formal once again. So here's my decision, Captain. You will remain here, in my court, as the first human ambassador to the Zephyrian Empire. You will learn our ways, our capabilities, and our enemies. And when you have learned enough, you will return to your people and help them understand what opportunities and dangers await them among the stars. Marcus felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. And if I refuse, then you refuse, and I send you home with our thanks and a small gift for your service. The queen's smile was sharp as winter starlight. But I think we both know you won't refuse. Because refusing means leaving your species to face what's coming without preparation, without allies, without the knowledge they'll need to survive. Before Marcus could respond, Princess Lyralii appeared beside him, moving with that fluid grace that seemed to bend space around her. Mother, perhaps the captain would benefit from understanding exactly what threats you're referring to. The queen nodded, and the air around them shimmered. Suddenly, they were standing in what appeared to be deep space, surrounded by holographic representations of various sectors of the galaxy. Red zones pulsed ominously in several regions, and Marcus could see vast fleets moving between star systems. The Devourer swarms are moving rimward, the queen said, gesturing to one cluster of red indicators. They've consumed everything in the Magellanic Cloud and are looking for new feeding grounds. At their current rate of expansion, they'll reach the outer edges of human space in approximately 50 of your years. Another gesture brought up different indicators, these ones a sickly green color. The synthesis has been quiet for a generation, but our long-range sensors have detected activity in their core worlds. When they move quickly and with complete commitment to conversion. No species they've encountered has successfully resisted assimilation. A third set of indicators, these ones a deep purple that seem to hurt to look at directly. And the Void Singers have begun broadcasting again after centuries of silence. Where their songs reach, madness follows. Entire civilizations have turned on themselves, committing species-wide suicide rather than continuing to hear the melodies. The holographic display faded, leaving them back in the throne room. Marcus stared at the queen, trying to process the scale of what she'd just shown him. These are the realities your species will face, she said simply. With our guidance and protection, they might survive to become something greater. Without it, she shrugged, an oddly human gesture from someone so clearly alien. Well, the galaxy is littered with the ruins of species who thought they could face such threats alone. Marcus looked at Princess Lyralii, who had remained silent throughout her mother's explanation. And you agree with this assessment? I've seen the ruins, Captain, she said softly. Worlds where entire civilizations simply stopped, leaving behind only empty cities and the echoes of their last transmissions. I've walked through the crystal gardens where the synthesis stores the converted consciousness of species that no longer have physical forms. I've heard the faint traces of void singer melodies carried on solar winds from dead systems. Her impossible eyes met his. What my mother offers isn't charity, Captain. It's a chance for your species to avoid becoming another set of ruins for future archaeologists to puzzle over. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his species' future pressing down on him. When he'd thrown himself in front of that energy blast, he'd been thinking about one life, one moment, one simple choice between action and inaction. He'd never imagined that choice would ripple outward to encompass the fate of every human being who would ever be born. If I agree to this, he said finally, what exactly does it mean? What will my role be? You would be our student, our ambassador, and eventually our partner, the Queen replied. You would learn our technologies, our methods of warfare and diplomacy, our understanding of the galaxy's threats and opportunities. When you return to Earth, you would carry with you the knowledge and authority to help your species make the transition from a single-world civilization to a galactic power. And in return, your species accepts our protection and guidance. They join our alliance against the threats that face all life in the galaxy. They contribute their unique perspectives and capabilities to the greater good. The Queen's expression softened slightly, and perhaps most importantly, they teach us about this remarkable capacity for selfless courage that seems to be uniquely human. Marcus opened his eyes and looked around the impossible throne room, at the princess who watched him with ancient wisdom despite her apparent youth, at the Queen who commanded the loyalty of 1,000 worlds. He thought about Earth, about the struggling colonies, about the wars humanity was fighting against each other while completely oblivious to the vast threats moving through the darkness between stars. I'll need to contact my government, he said. They'll need to know what happened, what's being offered. Of course, the Queen agreed. But, Captain, understand that this offer isn't being made to your government. It's being made to you, personally, as the individual who proved that humanity possesses the qualities we value above all others. Her crystalline features became stern. Your leaders may choose to reject our offer, may decide they prefer to face the future alone. But the invitation remains yours, regardless of their decision. As the implications of that statement sank in, Marcus realized that his simple act of heroism had trapped him in a web of cosmic politics that he was nowhere near qualified to navigate. But, looking at the princess, remembering the moment he'd decided her life was worth his own, he knew he'd make the same choice again. The real question was whether he was brave enough to make the choice that came next. Marcus spent his first week in the Zephyrian court trying to understand the true scale of what he'd stumbled into. The suite they'd given him was larger than most human houses, with walls that could display any environment he could imagine and furniture that adapted to his needs before he fully realized he had them. But, despite the luxury, he felt like a goldfish who'd somehow ended up in an ocean full of sharks. The language barrier had been solved through what Princess Lyralii casually referred to as neural interfacing, a process that had downloaded the Zephyrian common tongue directly into his brain while he slept. The disorienting experience of suddenly understanding conversations in languages that sounded like crystalline chimes mixed with distant thunder was nothing compared to the cultural barriers that no technology could bridge. He discovered this during his first formal meal with the royal court. "The human finds our food adequate?" asked Lord Kethmore. a Zephyrian nobleman whose crystalline formations had grown into elaborate horn structures that suggested great age. His tone was politely curious, but Marcus caught the undercurrent of amusement from the other courtiers. Marcus looked down at his plate, where something that might charitably be called food slowly shifted colors in response to his body heat. It tasted like starlight and regret with an aftertaste of copper. "It's unique," he managed. "Fascinating," murmured Lady Valandra, her silver-veined skin pulsing with what Marcus had learned was the Zephyrian equivalent of laughter. On most worlds, unique is what one says when one cannot bring oneself to say horrible. The human concept of politeness, observe another courtier, appears to prioritize social harmony over truth. How delightfully primitive. Marcus felt his jaw clench, but before he could respond, Princess Lyraliai's voice cut across the conversation like a blade. "Lord Kethmore, perhaps you'd care to sample some human cuisine? I'm sure Captain Chun could describe the delicacies of his homeworld." The nobleman's expression shifted to something approaching concern. "Ah, well, perhaps another time." "I insist," the princess continued, her tone sweet as poison honey. "After all, if the captain can adapt to our customs, surely a being of your sophistication can appreciate the cultural exchange." Marcus realized he was witnessing a masterclass in courtly warfare. "Actually," he said, setting down his utensil, "Lord Kethmore raises an interesting point about truth versus politeness. In human culture, we've learned that truth without compassion is often just cruelty in disguise." The table fell silent, and Marcus could feel the weight of attention from beings whose casual thoughts could probably calculate the orbital mechanics of entire star systems. "We tell socialize not because we're primitive, but because we understand that relationships are more complex than simple information exchange. Sometimes preserving someone's dignity is more important than expressing our immediate reaction." "And yet," Lord Kethmore said slowly, "you threw yourself in front of a weapon to save someone you barely knew. That hardly seems like the action of someone who prioritizes social comfort." Marcus met the alien noble's gaze steadily. "No, it doesn't. Because in that moment, truth and compassion aligned. The truth was that Princess Lyraliai was about to die, and compassion demanded that I act." He paused, considering his words carefully. "The difference between wisdom and intelligence, Lord Kethmore, is knowing when principle should guide action and when they should guide restraint." Queen Nalera, who had been silently observing the exchange, made a sound like crystal chimes in harmony. "An interesting perspective, Captain. Please elaborate on this distinction." Marcus realized he was about to either make a powerful point or thoroughly embarrass himself in front of beings who could reduce Earth to cosmic dust without particularly exerting themselves. Intelligence tells you that revealing someone's flaws serves no purpose except to demonstrate your own superiority. Wisdom tells you that building people up serves purposes that benefit everyone involved. He gestured to the assembled courtiers. "Your people have had thousands of years to develop intelligence. But wisdom requires experiencing enough failure and loss to understand the difference between being right and being helpful. And humans have experienced sufficient failure to develop this wisdom," asked Lady Valandra, though her tone had lost its earlier mockery. "We've experienced enough failure to fill several galaxies," Marcus replied dryly, earning what might have been appreciative sound from around the table. "Wars that accomplished nothing except death, conflict that destroyed more than they preserved, countless examples of intelligence without wisdom leading to catastrophe." He looked directly at the queen. "Maybe that's why we're willing to die for strangers. We've learned that sometimes the stupidest thing you can do is the only right thing you can do." The queen studied him for a long moment, then gestured to one of her attendants. "Lord Kethmore, I believe you expressed interest in human cuisine." The nobleman's crystalline features went through several color changes that Marcus was beginning to recognize as the equivalent of a human nervous breakdown. "Your Majesty, perhaps I misspoke earlier." "Nonsense," the queen said cheerfully. "Cultural exchange is vital to understanding. Captain Shun, please describe one of your people's traditional meals. Marcus considered his options and decided that if he was going to be thrown into the deep end of galactic politics, he might as well make a splash. Well, there's a dish we call ballet. It's a duck embryo that's been fertilized and incubated for about 2 weeks, then boiled and eaten from the shell. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear the distant hum of the palace's energy systems. Several courtiers had changed colors in ways that suggested significant distress. Of course, Marcus continued conversationally, we also have pizza, which is bread covered with tomato sauce and melted cheese, often with various meats and vegetables. Most humans would choose pizza over ballet, but both exist within our cuisine because cultural diversity includes things that aren't to everyone's taste. Princess Lyralii was making a sound that Marcus realized was the Zephyrian equivalent of barely suppressed laughter. How fascinating, she managed. And which would you recommend for Lord Kethmore's first experience with human food? Pizza, Marcus said without hesitation, because wisdom involves understanding your audience. The Queen's laugh was like a cascade of musical crystal, and suddenly, the tension in the room dissolved into something approaching genuine amusement. I believe, she said, that we're beginning to understand why your species caught our attention, Captain Shun. After the meal, Princess Lyralii walked with Marcus through one of the palace's impossible gardens, where plants from a dozen different worlds grew in careful harmony under light that somehow felt like natural sunlight despite being generated by technology beyond human comprehension. You handled that well, she said as they passed a grove of trees that sang soft melodies when the wind touched their leaves. Kethmore was testing you, seeing if you'd respond to mockery with anger or servility. You chose a third option. I chose honesty, Marcus replied. It seemed like the safest bet in a room full of people who could probably read my thoughts if they wanted to. We can't actually read thoughts, Lyralii said. But we can sense emotional states, and most species become quite transparent when they're trying to hide their reactions. She paused beside a fountain where water flowed upward in defiance of gravity, forming complex patterns in the air before returning to its source. You, however, seem to have unusual control over your emotional responses. Military training, Marcus said simply. You learn to function under stress, to think clearly when everything's going wrong. He watched the impossible water patterns for a moment. Though I have to admit, this is well outside my usual operational parameters. How so? Marcus considered how to explain the disconnect between his military experience and his current situation. In combat, you know who the enemy is. You know what success looks like. You understand the rules, even when those rules involve people trying to kill you. He gestured at the garden around them. This feels like being invited to play a game where I don't understand the objectives. The rules change without notice, and the consequences of failure might involve the extinction of my entire species. That's not entirely inaccurate, Lyralii admitted, though I should point out that the consequences of success might involve the elevation of your entire species. The question is whether you're prepared for the responsibilities that come with either outcome. Before Marcus could ask what she meant, they were interrupted by the arrival of one of the Queen's advisors, a Zephyrian whose crystalline formations had grown into complex geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Princess, the advisor said, his voice carrying harmonic frequencies that seemed to bypass Marcus's ears and resonate directly in his bones. The Queen requests the human's presence in the strategic assessment chamber. The long-range sensors have detected movement in the outer spiral. Lyralii's expression shifted to something Marcus recognized as professional concern. Which sector? Epsilon Carini, a devourer scout swarm, moving faster than previous projections indicated. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the garden's carefully controlled climate. How much faster? The advisor's geometric patterns shifted in what Marcus was learning to recognize as the equivalent of deep worry. They'll reach the outer edges of human space in 30 years instead of 50. The strategic assessment chamber turned out to be less of a room and more of a three-dimensional representation of local galactic space, where beings could walk among holographic star systems and manipulate vast fleets with simple gestures. Marcus felt like an ant that had wandered into a library, surrounded by information and capabilities he could barely comprehend. Queen Alara stood at the center of the display, her crystalline crown interfacing directly with the chamber systems. Around her, dozens of advisors and military commanders moved among the holographic stars, updating projections and analyzing threat assessments with casual efficiency that spoke of centuries of practice. "Captain Chun," the queen called without turning around. "Come here. I want you to see this." Marcus walked carefully through the display, trying not to accidentally bump into any star systems. When he reached the queen's position, she gestured, and the view zoomed in on a section of space that looked ominously empty. "This," she said, "is what a devourer swarm looks like when it's feeding." The display showed a star system, but instead of planets orbiting the central star, there were only expanding clouds of debris and what appeared to be massive organic structures. As Marcus watched, he could see the structures growing, consuming the debris and becoming larger and more complex. "They convert everything," Queen Alara explained. "Planets, asteroids, even the gas from stellar atmospheres. Within a few years, they'll have grown enough to reproduce, splitting off new swarms that spread to adjacent systems." "What happened to any life in that system?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Consumed first," the queen replied matter-of-factly. "Biological material provides the base templates for their growth. They're quite efficient about it." The display shifted, showing the projected path of expansion. Marcus could see the swarms spreading through space like a plague, leaving empty systems in their wake. And at the edge of their projected expansion, "Earth," he said quietly. "Earth and approximately 47 other worlds with developing civilizations," the queen confirmed. "Some of them species we've been observing for millennia, waiting for them to develop sufficient technology and wisdom to join the galactic community." Marcus stared at the projection, trying to comprehend the scale of destruction it represented. Billions of lives, entire civilizations, simply converted into raw materials for an expanding swarm of planet-eating monsters. "What can we do about it?" he asked. "We?" Queen Alara turned to look at him directly. "An interesting choice of pronoun, Captain. Are you speaking as a representative of humanity or as an individual?" Marcus realized he was at another crucial decision point, one of those moments that would echo forward through time regardless of what choice he made. "I'm speaking as someone who refuses to watch innocent people die when there's something that can be done to prevent it, even if preventing it requires your species to make sacrifices they might not be willing to make, even if it means committing humanity to conflicts they don't understand against enemies they can't imagine." The queen gestured, and the display showed human space in detail. Earth, the lunar colonies, the struggling settlements on Mars, and the moons of Jupiter, the generation ships that had launched toward nearby stars, carrying desperate refugees from Earth's overcrowded cities. All of it, Marcus realized, utterly defenseless against the kind of threat they were looking at. "My species has a saying," Marcus said finally. "When you're hanging off a cliff, you don't negotiate with the person offering to pull you up. You grab the rope and worry about the consequences later. And if the rope comes with strings attached, then you hope the strings don't strangle you before you figure out how to cut them." Marcus looked around the chamber, at beings whose casual conversation involved moving fleets that could level planets. "Your Majesty, I'm not qualified to make decisions for my entire species, but I am qualified to recognize when someone needs help and when someone else is in a position to provide it." Queen Alara studied him for a long moment, then gestured again. The display zoomed out, showing not just the devourer swarm, but other threats as well. The green indicators Marcus had seen before, marking synthesis activity. Purple zones where the void singers have been detected. And scattered throughout the galaxy, dozens of other smaller threats that nonetheless represented extinction-level dangers to species like humanity. The galaxy is not a safe place, Captain Shun, she said. For the past 3 million years, my people have served as shepherds, guiding younger species through the dangers that would otherwise consume them. We've saved thousands of civilizations, elevated hundreds of species to levels of development they never could have achieved alone. And in return, they contribute to the greater defense of all life. They provide perspectives we lack, capabilities we've lost, innovations we haven't considered. The Queen's crystalline features showed something that might have been ancient sadness. The galaxy has room for diversity, Captain, but only if that diversity is protected by those strong enough to shield it from the forces that would destroy it. Marcus thought about Earth, about the wars still being fought over resources and territory, about the political divisions that prevented any unified response to global threats. Then, he thought about what he'd seen in this chamber, the casual competence with which the Zephyrians managed threats that would obliterate human civilization. "What would you need from us?" he asked. "If humanity accepted your protection, what would our obligations be?" "Initially, nothing beyond survival," the Queen replied. "Your species would be relocated to worlds within our protected space, given time to develop without the pressure of external threats. But eventually, as your capabilities grew, you would be expected to contribute to the common defense." "Relocated?" Marcus felt a chill. "You're talking about abandoning Earth. I'm talking about preserving humanity. Earth is directly in the path of the Devourer swarm. Captain, in 30 years, it will be consumed regardless of what defenses your people might develop. The choice is between evacuation and extinction." The finality of the statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. Earth, the cradle of humanity, the world that had given birth to every human who had ever lived, reduced to raw materials for creatures that saw planets as nothing more than convenient snacks. How many people could you evacuate? All of them, if necessary, though the logistics would be challenging. Queen Alara gestured, and the display showed massive ships appearing around Earth's orbit. "We have the capability to transport entire populations, though the cultural shock would be significant." Marcus tried to imagine 7 billion humans being told they had to abandon their home world for destinations they couldn't pronounce, protected by beings they couldn't understand. The resistance would be enormous, the political chaos unimaginable. There would be another option, Princess Lyralii said, appearing beside them with that fluid movement that still startled Marcus. If humanity proved capable of rapid development, if they could demonstrate the potential to contribute meaningfully to galactic defense within the next 30 years, they might earn the right to have Earth defended rather than evacuated. "What kind of contribution?" Marcus asked. "The kind that proves your species' unique perspective has value," the Queen replied. "We've observed human behavior for several of your centuries, Captain Shun. Your people have certain capabilities that even we find remarkable, such as adaptability under pressure, innovation when facing impossible odds, and, most importantly, the ability to sacrifice for principles rather than practical benefit." The Queen turned to face him fully. "These qualities make humans potentially valuable allies. But potential means nothing without actualization." Marcus felt the weight of his species' future pressing down on him again. Every choice seemed to lead to impossible consequences, every path forward requiring leaps of faith that could doom billions of people if he guessed wrong. "What would the test involve?" he asked. "That," Queen Alara said, "would depend on you. As our designated human representative, you would help design the criteria by which your species' potential would be evaluated. You would serve as both advocate and judge, ensuring the assessment was fair while maintaining the standards necessary for galactic citizenship. And if we fail the test, then we evacuate who we can and add humanity to the list of civilizations that needed more time than the galaxy was willing to give them." Marcus closed his eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what was being offered and demanded. When he opened them again, Princess Lyralii was watching him with those impossible galaxy eyes. "How long do I have to decide?" he asked. "You have as long as you need to understand the choice you're making," the Queen replied. "But The Devourer swarm doesn't care about our timeline, Captain. Every day of delay is a day closer to the moment when choice becomes irrelevant. As Marcus stood among the holographic stars, surrounded by beings who treated the movement of fleets as casually as humans might discuss the weather, he realized that his simple act of heroism had trapped him in responsibilities that no single person should have to bear. But, looking at the projection of Earth, at the billions of lives that would be consumed if he chose wrong, he knew he would have to find the strength to bear them anyway. The question was whether humanity would prove worthy of the faith he was about to place in them. Marcus spent the next month learning how to think on a galactic scale, and it nearly broke him. The education began with what Princess Lyralii cheerfully called cosmic perspective adjustment, which involved spending hours in sensory chambers that let him experience space and time from the viewpoint of various alien species. He learned what it felt like to perceive electromagnetic radiation across the entire spectrum, to sense gravitational fields as clearly as humans felt wind, and to think in time frames where centuries passed like seconds. The experience left him with migraines that no human medicine could touch, and a profound understanding of how utterly insignificant Earth appeared from anything approaching a galactic perspective. "The nausea will pass," Dr. Valthera assured him as she ran crystalline instruments over his skull, their soft humming somehow soothing the chaos in his brain. The Zephyrian physician had been assigned to monitor his adaptation to what she termed cognitive expansion beyond baseline human parameters. "How long does it usually take?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady as another wave of vertigo washed over him. "For most species, several years of gradual exposure." Dr. Valthera's expression showed what he'd learned to recognize as mild amusement. "You've been attempting to compress that process into weeks. It's either remarkably ambitious or remarkably foolish." "Maybe both," Marcus admitted. "But 30 years isn't a lot of time to prepare an entire species for galactic citizenship." "No, it isn't." The doctor's tone became more serious. "Which is why the Queen has authorized some rather aggressive measures to accelerate your education." Before Marcus could ask what that meant, Princess Lyralii entered the medical chamber, followed by a Zephyrian he didn't recognize. This newcomer was smaller than the others he'd met, with crystalline formations that seemed to shift and flow like living water. When she moved, space seemed to bend slightly around her, creating visual distortions that made Marcus's already challenged brain throb harder. "Captain Shun," the princess said, "I'd like you to meet Sage Yithmodal, one of our foremost experts in temporal mechanics and probability analysis." The sage stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice seemed to come from multiple directions at once. "Human, I have been tasked with showing you the true scope of the choices before your species. Are you prepared for absolute honesty?" Marcus looked between the princess and the sage, noting the careful way they avoided meeting each other's eyes. "I don't think I'm prepared for anything that's happened to me in the last month, but that doesn't seem to be stopping anyone." "Good answer." Sage Yithmodal gestured, and the medical chamber dissolved around them, replaced by something that Marcus's brain initially interpreted as an endless black void. Then, slowly, points of light began to appear, and he realized they were standing in a representation of the observable universe itself. "This," the sage said, "is existence as we understand it. Approximately 14 billion years of stellar formation, planetary development, and the emergence of consciousness in various forms." She gestured again, and the view zoomed in to show their local galaxy cluster. "Your Milky Way, our Andromeda, and the smaller galaxies in our local group represent a tiny fraction of what exists, but they contain approximately 90% of all known intelligent life." "Why?" Marcus asked, though he suspected the answer would be disturbing. "Because intelligence is rare, and survival is rarer still." The sage pointed to vast, empty regions between galaxy clusters. "Those spaces are not empty, Captain Shun. They are full of the remains of civilizations that failed to achieve sustainable galactic citizenship. Matter converted to energy in wars that consumed entire galactic superclusters. dark energy signatures that suggest reality itself was damaged by conflicts beyond your current comprehension. The view shifted, showing what appeared to be galaxies arranged in impossible geometric patterns, connected by streams of energy that hurt to look at directly. The predecessors, the civilization that came before all others, left behind structures that still function after 65 million years. But even they eventually faced challenges that ended their direct presence in this reality. Marcus felt his perspective stretching again, trying to accommodate concepts that no human mind was meant to hold. What kind of challenges? The kind that your species will face if they survive long enough to become truly galactic. Sage Yithmodal's crystalline features shifted into patterns that suggested deep concern. The Devourers, the Synthesis, the Void Singers, all of these are merely local threats, problems that affect individual galaxies or star clusters. The real challenges exist at scales that dwarf even our current understanding. The display changed again, showing what appear to be vast networks of galaxies connected by impossible structures, energy patterns that suggested intelligence operating at cosmic scales. Somewhere out there, beings exist who use galaxies the way we use star systems, who treat the birth and death of stellar clusters as casual engineering projects, who have transcended individual existence to become something that spans multiple realities simultaneously. And they're hostile? Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect that terms like hostile and friendly became meaningless at such scales. They're indifferent, the princess said quietly. Which is worse? A hostile enemy at least acknowledges your existence. An indifferent one doesn't notice when they accidentally obliterate everything you've ever cared about. Sage Yitmodal Noded. This is why the Queen's offer to your species is so significant, Captain. The path to cosmic citizenship is extraordinarily narrow. Most species never make it past the local threat stage. Those that do face challenges that require cooperation on scales that transcend individual world loyalties or even individual species loyalties. The view zoomed back to show their local galactic region, but now Marcus could see additional details. Networks of energy connecting star systems, vast ships moving between galaxies, and what appear to be artificial structures the size of solar systems. The Galactic Concord, the sage explained, currently includes approximately 2,000 species across 47 galaxies. Each member species contributes unique capabilities to the common defense and advancement. But membership requires proving that a species can think and act beyond their immediate survival needs. What kind of proof? That depends on the species. Sage Yithmodal gestured, and the display showed various alien civilizations. Some looked vaguely humanoid, others were geometric patterns of pure energy, and still others defied any attempt at classification. The Velkarim proved their worth by solving a mathematics problem that had stymied the Concord for 3,000 years. The Nethys demonstrated unprecedented mastery of biological engineering. The Korth showed the ability to maintain cultural stability across thousands of worlds over millions of years. And what would humans need to prove? That, Princess Lyralii said, is what we're trying to determine. Your species is unusual, Captain. Most civilizations that reach this stage of development have certain predictable characteristics. They've unified their home world, eliminated internal conflicts, developed sustainable population controls, and established clear hierarchies for decision-making. Humans have done none of these things, Sage Yithmodal observed, her tone suggesting this was a significant problem. You remain fragmented, conflict-prone, and seemingly incapable of long-term planning. By normal standards, your species should not be considered for Concord membership for at least another 1,000 years. Marcus felt a flash of defensive anger. We're working on it. Human civilization has made enormous progress in just the last few centuries. Yes, the sage agreed. But progress toward what? Your technological advancement has far outpaced your social and ethical development. You've developed weapons capable of destroying your homeworld while still fighting wars over resources that should be abundant. You've achieved space travel while maintaining economic systems that ensure billions of your people live in poverty. The criticism stung because Marcus recognized its accuracy. Earth's geopolitical situation was indeed chaotic by any rational standard, with nuclear-armed nations maintaining uneasy truces while climate change and resource depletion threatened global stability. But Princess Lorelei interjected, "Your species also demonstrates capabilities that more advanced civilizations often lack. Your response to crisis is frequently remarkable. When faced with extinction-level threats, humans have shown an unprecedented ability to transcend their normal limitations." Such as, Marcus asked, "The response to the asteroid impact of 2019, the princess replied. When global sensors detected an extinction-level asteroid that your technology couldn't stop, humanity achieved unprecedented cooperation. 16 nations contributed resources to a joint mission that successfully deflected the impact. Political enemies worked together despite ongoing conflicts." Marcus remembered the Apophis crisis, the 6 months when the entire world held its breath while hastily assembled space missions raced to save civilization. It had been humanity's finest hour in many ways, proof that people could work together when the stakes were high enough. Or the plague wars of the early 21st century, Sage Yithmodal added. When biological weapons threatened to destroy your species, human researchers shared information across national boundaries despite military conflicts. Enemies collaborated to develop treatments, often sharing critical data even when it provided strategic disadvantages. These behaviors, the princess continued, suggest that humans might be capable of the kind of transcendent cooperation required for galactic citizenship. But they only manifest under extreme pressure when your survival is directly threatened. The implications of that observation settled over Marcus like a cold blanket. You're saying that for my species to prove worthy of membership in your galactic community, we need to face a threat serious enough to force us to transcend our normal limitations. We're saying that such a test might be the only way to determine whether humanity possesses the potential for true galactic citizenship, Sage Yithmodal corrected. The question is whether your species can maintain that transcendent cooperation once the immediate threat passes. The display around them shifted again, showing Earth in detail. Marcus could see the planet's cities, the orbital installations, the struggling colonies on Mars, and the outer moons. It looked so small from this perspective, so fragile and isolated. "What kind of test are you considering?" he asked. "Something that would require unprecedented cooperation between all human governments and populations," the princess replied. "Something that couldn't be solved by any single nation or group, that would demand the kind of species-level unity that your people have never achieved." The evacuation scenario would serve, Sage Yithmodal mused. Moving 7 billion people to new worlds would require logistical cooperation on a scale your species has never attempted. But evacuation is passive, reactive. For true citizenship, we need proof of active capability. "What do you mean?" "We mean," Princess Lorelei said carefully, "that the final test would involve humans taking an active role in galactic defense. Not just being protected, but providing protection to others." The display zoomed out again, showing the approaching devourer swarm. But now Marcus could see additional details, other star systems in its path that contained developing civilizations. The Kythera system, the princess pointed to one cluster of worlds, home to a species that achieved space travel 3 centuries ago. They have approximately 4 billion inhabitants across 6 worlds, and they've developed remarkable artistic and philosophical traditions. They're not yet ready for Concord membership, but they show tremendous potential. The Devourer Swarm will reach their system 8 years before it reaches yours, Sage Yithmodal added. By the normal protocols, we would evacuate what population we could and write off their civilization as another casualty of cosmic timing. Marcus began to see where this was leading, and The magnitude of it took his breath away. You want humans to save them. We want humans to choose to save them, the princess corrected. Without coercion, without being ordered to do so, as a free expression of your species' values. Using technology we would provide, but taking full responsibility for the mission's success or failure. And if we succeed, then you prove that humanity can think beyond tribal survival, that you're capable of the kind of selfless action that galactic citizenship requires, Sage Yithmodal replied. Your species would be granted full membership in the Galactic Concord with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. And if we fail, then approximately 4 billion innocent beings die, and humanity proves that they're not yet ready for the responsibilities we would place on them. The princess's expression was grave. The evacuation of Earth would proceed as planned, but membership in the Concord would be postponed until your species demonstrates greater maturity. Marcus stared at the display, at the Kythera system that represented both an opportunity and a test whose failure would cost billions of lives. The scope of the decision was overwhelming, the responsibility almost paralytic in its magnitude. Why are you telling me this? He asked finally. Why not make the offer directly to Earth's governments? Because governments think like governments, Sage Yithmodal replied. They calculate political advantages, consider economic impacts, weigh the risks to their own populations above all other concerns. What we need to know is whether humanity can think like a species, whether individuals can make choices that serve the greater good, even when those choices offer no direct benefit to themselves. You represent something rare among galactic civilizations, the princess added. A person who has demonstrated the ability to act for others without calculating personal gain. If you cannot convince your species to attempt this mission, then no one can. The weight of that statement settled on Marcus like a mountain. His choice wouldn't just affect humanity's future relationship with the galactic community. It would determine whether an entire alien civilization lived or died. How long do I have to make this decision? He asked. The test must be proposed within the next 6 months if there's to be sufficient time for your species to prepare, Sage Yithmodal replied. But, Captain, understand that once the proposal is made, there could be no backing down. If humanity accepts the mission and then fails to follow through, it would demonstrate exactly the kind of unreliability that makes species unsuitable for galactic citizenship. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to imagine how he would explain this to Earth's leaders. The politics alone would be a nightmare, with every nation wanting to control the mission, every faction seeing opportunities for advantage, every leader calculating how the decision would affect their own position. But then he thought about the moment he'd thrown himself in front of that energy weapon, the split second when calculation had given way to simple moral clarity. Maybe that was what this test was really about. Not whether humanity could solve complex problems, but whether they could still recognize the simple ones. There's something else you should know, the princess said softly. The Kythera aren't the only civilization in the path of the Devourer's swarm. Success with their rescue would qualify humanity for increasingly complex missions, each one proving greater capability for galactic responsibility. And failure? Failure means watching other civilizations die while knowing you could have saved them. Her galaxy eyes met his directly. That's the burden of power, Captain. Once you know you can help, choosing not to becomes a choice to let people die. Marcus opened his eyes and looked around at the cosmic display surrounding them. Billions of stars, trillions of worlds, countless civilizations scattered across space and time, all of them connected by invisible threads of cause and effect that turned individual choices into species-defining moments. He thought about Earth, about the wars and conflicts and petty divisions that seemed so important to the people fighting them. Then he thought about the Kythera, for billion beings who would die or live based on whether humanity could transcend those divisions for long enough to save them. I'll need to return to Earth, he said finally. I'll need to explain all of this to people who can barely comprehend interplanetary politics, let alone galactic ones. Yes, Queen Nalera's voice echoed around them as she materialized in the cosmic display like a goddess made of starlight. You will. And Captain Shun, you'll need to convince them not just that they should accept this mission, but that they must accept it. Because the alternative to proving humanity's worth to the galaxy is not just evacuation. What do you mean? I mean that if your species cannot demonstrate the capacity for galactic citizenship, if they prove to be just another tribal civilization with dangerous technology, then evacuation becomes a temporary solution to a permanent problem. The Queen's presence filled the cosmic display like a force of nature. Eventually, we would have to make the same choice about humanity that we've made about dozens of other species that couldn't transcend their limitations. The implication hung in the space between them like a death sentence. Marcus understood, with perfect crystal clarity, that he wasn't just advocating for humanity's membership in a galactic community. He was fighting for their right to continue existing at all. "How long do I have on Earth?" he asked. 3 months, the Queen replied. "Long enough to present our offer, explain the situation, and allow your leaders to make their choice. But not long enough for the kind of extended debate that humans seem to prefer." Marcus nodded, accepting the timeline, even as part of his mind recoiled from the impossibility of the task ahead. 3 months to convince 7 billion people to work together on a scale they'd never achieved, for the benefit of beings they'd never met, against threats they couldn't imagine. It should have been impossible. But as he looked around at the cosmic display, at the vast network of civilizations that had somehow managed to transcend their individual limitations and work together for the common good, Marcus realized that impossible was just another word for something that hadn't been done yet. The question was whether humanity was ready to do something that had never been done before, and whether he was strong enough to convince them they had no choice. Marcus returned to Earth on a Tuesday morning that felt like stepping backward through time itself. After 3 months among beings who casually manipulated gravity and spoke in frequencies that bypassed the ears entirely, the simple act of breathing unfiltered air felt strange. The shuttle that brought him down from the orbital station was primitive beyond belief compared to Zephyrian technology, its chemical rockets as crude as stone tools. But it was human, and for the first time since he'd thrown himself in front of that energy weapon, Marcus felt like he was home. The debriefing lasted 18 hours and involved representatives from every major government on Earth, plus a few that Marcus hadn't known existed. He sat in a sterile conference room in Geneva, facing a horseshoe arrangement of tables where the most powerful people on the planet tried to process information that redefined humanity's place in the universe. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," said Dr. Elizabeth Chun, no relation despite the shared surname, who represented the European Science Consortium. "You're telling us that in 30 years, Earth will be destroyed by alien creatures that eat planets, unless we accept protection from a galactic empire that wants us to prove ourselves by saving another alien civilization first." "That's an oversimplification, but essentially accurate," Marcus replied. He'd been answering variations of the same question for hours, watching as Earth's leaders struggled with concepts that had taken him weeks to accept. "And if we refuse this test?" asked General Morrison, the grizzled American military representative who'd been Marcus's commanding officer before the diplomatic assignment. "Then they evacuate as many humans as they can and resettle us on worlds within their protected space. Earth gets consumed by the devourers, but our species survives as refugees under alien protection. Some might consider that preferable to risking billions of lives on an untested rescue mission," observed Dr. Yuki Tanaka, speaking for the Pacific Alliance. Marcus had expected that argument. Some might. But evacuation means abandoning Earth, abandoning our independence, and accepting permanent status as a protected species rather than full galactic citizens. We'd survive, but we'd never be equals. Equality with beings who can manipulate space-time. President Rodriguez laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Captain, that's not equality. That's a child pretending to sit at the adult table." "Maybe," Marcus admitted, "but the alternative is being a child forever, dependent on others for protection we can't provide ourselves. And eventually, even the most benevolent protectors grow tired of carrying children who refuse to grow up. The room fell silent as the implications of that statement sank in. Marcus had spent his time among the Zephyrians learning to read between the lines, to understand the things they didn't say directly. The Queen's offer was generous by any standard, but generosity could be withdrawn. "Show us the technical specifications again," demanded Dr. Petrov from the Russian Federation, for the ships they're offering to provide. Marcus activated the holographic display unit the Zephyrians had given him, filling the center of the room with detailed schematics of the rescue vessels. Even in simplified form, the technology was breathtaking. Ships that could travel between star systems in weeks rather than centuries, energy sources that made fusion reactors look like campfires, and defensive systems capable of protecting entire fleets from planetary-scale weapons. The ships would be on loan, Marcus explained. Full technical documentation included, but the advanced systems would remain locked until humanity demonstrates the responsibility to use them properly. "What constitutes properly?" asked Admiral Singh from the Indian Ocean Federation. "Successfully completing the rescue mission without causing more deaths than we prevent," Marcus replied. The Zephyrians have run probability models. There are approximately 40,000 different ways this mission could go wrong, and most of them result in the destruction of both the Kythera civilization and the human rescue fleet. "Those are terrible odds," General Morrison observed. "They're better than the odds of the Kythera surviving without intervention," Marcus countered, "which are exactly zero." Secretary General Williams leaned forward in her chair. "Captain, you've spent months with these aliens. What's your personal assessment? Do you trust them?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I trust that they're telling the truth about the threats we face. I trust that they're offering us genuine protection and opportunities. But I also trust that they're utterly pragmatic about survival. If humanity proves to be a liability rather than an asset, they'll cut us loose without hesitation. And yet you're recommending we accept their offer?" "I'm recommending we accept reality," Marcus said firmly. "The Devourer swarm exists whether we acknowledge it or not. In 30 years, it will reach Earth whether we're prepared for it or not. The Zephyrians aren't creating this crisis. They're offering us a way to survive it." Director Hassan from the African Union raised his hand. "What about the timeline? You're asking us to reorganize global society and mount an interstellar rescue mission in less than 8 years. That's not enough time for the kind of international cooperation this would require." "It's the time we have," Marcus replied. "And honestly, it might be an advantage. When humans have too much time to plan, we tend to overcomplicate things. When we're facing a deadline, we focus on what's actually important. Or we panic and make catastrophic mistakes," Dr. Chun pointed out. "That's also possible. But panic and mistakes are still better than extinction through inaction." The debate continued for hours, with representatives raising objections that range from practical concerns about logistics to philosophical questions about humanity's right to risk billions of lives on what amounted to a cosmic test. Marcus answered what he could and admitted ignorance when he couldn't, but through it all, he kept coming back to the same fundamental point. "We can't solve this problem by pretending it doesn't exist," he said during one particularly heated exchange about the political impossibility of global cooperation. "The Devourers don't care about our internal conflicts or our constitutional limitations. They'll consume Earth regardless of whether we've figured out how to work together. But this rescue mission," President Rodriguez argued, "it's not just about saving these Kythera. It's about proving something to galactic civilization. What happens if we save them, but the aliens decide we did it for the wrong reasons? What if they decide our methods were too violent or our cooperation wasn't pure enough?" Marcus had wondered about that himself during the long journey home. "Then we'll have saved 4 billion innocent lives, and that will have to be enough. Sometimes doing the right thing is its own reward, regardless of whether anyone else appreciates it." The formal session ended near midnight, but the real negotiations began immediately afterward. Marcus found himself shuttled between private meetings with heads of state, military leaders, and scientific advisors, each group trying to understand what the Zephyrian offer would mean for their particular interests. The Chinese delegation was primarily concerned about technology transfer and economic implications. The Americans wanted detailed intelligence about alien military capabilities. The Europeans focused on philosophical questions about humanity's role in galactic civilization. The developing nations worried about being left behind in a transformation they couldn't afford to participate in. Through it all, Marcus tried to convey the one thing that seemed most difficult for Earth's leaders to grasp: the scale of the threat they were facing and the corresponding scale of the opportunity being offered. "You're thinking like nations," he told the emergency session of the UN Security Council 3 days into the discussions. But this isn't about nations anymore. It's about species survival and species evolution. Everything we've ever fought about, every border dispute and resource conflict and ideological difference, all of it becomes irrelevant if we don't exist to fight about it. "That's easy to say," replied the British representative, "but political reality doesn't disappear just because we're facing an existential threat. The people we represent still care about their immediate concerns more than hypothetical future crises." "Then, make it non-hypothetical," Marcus said. "Use the communication system the Zephyrians provided. Let people see the Devourer swarm for themselves. Let them understand what 30 years means when measured against geological time." That evening, every major news network on Earth broadcast the first public release of alien intelligence. The footage was impossible to deny or dismiss. Vast organic structures consuming entire planets, converting billions of years of geological history into raw materials for expansion. The scale was so enormous that human minds could barely process it. But the implications were crystal clear. Earth had 30 years to prepare for something that would make every natural disaster in human history look like minor inconveniences. The public reaction was immediate and intense. Some people panicked, others went into denial. But a surprising number seemed to accept the information with the kind of grim determination that Marcus had seen during humanity's greatest crises. Within days, spontaneous cooperation began emerging at levels that formal diplomacy had never achieved. Industrial corporations started sharing proprietary research without being asked. Scientific institutions opened their databases to international collaboration. Military forces began joint training exercises that had been politically impossible just weeks earlier. It wasn't universal, and it wasn't perfect, but it was unprecedented. "It's remarkable," Dr. Chun observed during a follow-up briefing. "You present people with a threat large enough, and suddenly their tribal instincts expand to include the entire species. The question is whether it will last," General Morrison added grimly. "History shows that cooperation born from crisis usually collapses once the immediate threat passes. Then, we make sure the immediate threat doesn't pass until the cooperation becomes permanent," Marcus replied. "The Kithra rescue mission isn't just about proving ourselves to the aliens. It's about proving to ourselves that we can function as a unified species when necessary." The breakthrough came 6 weeks into the global discussions from an unexpected source. Dr. Maria Santos, a relatively junior researcher from the Brazilian Space Agency, proposed a solution that had escaped everyone else. "We're approaching this wrong," she announced during a technical planning session. "We're trying to design a human mission using alien technology. But that's not what the Zephyrians are offering. They're offering to teach us how to design an alien mission using human thinking." Marcus looked at the proposal she drafted, recognizing immediately that she'd grasped something fundamental about the test they were facing. "Explain." "The technology is just tools," Dr. Santos continued. "Advanced tools, yes, but still just tools. What makes this mission possible isn't the ships or the weapons or the energy sources. It's the decision-making process that determines how those tools get used." She activated a holographic display showing the proposed mission structure. Instead of a traditional military hierarchy, she designed something that looked more like a distributed network, with decision-making authority spread across multiple teams and contingency plans that could adapt to circumstances no central command could predict. Human chaos management, she called it. We don't try to plan for every possibility because that's impossible. Instead, we build in the capacity to improvise, to adapt, to change plans completely when circumstances demand it. We turn our inability to stick to rigid plans into an advantage. Marcus studied the proposal, seeing immediately how it addressed many of the concerns that had stymied the formal planning process. This could work, but it would require a level of trust between participating nations that we've never achieved before. Which brings us back to the fundamental question Dr. Santos agreed. Are we capable of that kind of trust, or aren't we? Because if we aren't, then we shouldn't attempt this mission. Better to evacuate honestly than to fail spectacularly. The final decision came down to a vote that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. A binding referendum that required not just government approval, but direct popular consent from every major population center on Earth. For the first time in human history, the entire species was being asked to make a collective choice about their future. Marcus spent the final weeks of the campaign traveling to every continent, speaking to crowds that ranged from university auditoriums to refugee camps, trying to explain in simple terms what the choice really meant. We're not just voting on whether to attempt this rescue mission, he told a gathering in Lagos that included representatives from 47 African nations. We're voting on what kind of species we want to be. Do we want to be the kind of people who save others when we can, or the kind who only look out for ourselves? But the risk called out a voice from the crowd. If we fail, if billions of our people die in this attempt, how do we justify that to their families? Marcus had fielded that question thousands of times by now, and he still didn't have a perfect answer. We justify it the same way we justify any dangerous choice that serves a purpose larger than individual safety. The way we justify sending firefighters into burning buildings, or soldiers into war zones, or doctors into epidemic zones. Sometimes the